Okay, so, hey, Patrick.
Hi.
So, this is Patrick Silva, and, how are you doing, first of all?
Doing good.
That's good to hear.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
It's good to say.
That is. So, I would like to ask you some questions about 9/11, if that's alright with you.
Okay, fine with me.
Alright, you know this is going to be shown to as a project, right?
Right.
Okay. So, my first question is, where were you on the morning of September 11th, 2001?
I was flying from Providence, Rhode Island down to Orlando, Florida. Pretty much in a straight line. So directly over Manhattan that morning.
Yeah. What were you doing there?
I was planning on moving to Florida, actually. I was on my way down there for a 3-day trip to scout out houses and job interviews and whatnot. I had a friend of mine that moved down there a few months earlier that had come back up to settle his aunt's estate. And he was flying back that Tuesday morning, and I was basically hitching a ride with him, essentially. And was just going to be down there for 3 days to kind of just start the process of relocating down there.
Yeah. When did you first notice that something was wrong?
I was in the Orlando airport, actually just getting off the plane. And we were kind of oblivious to what was going on because it was relatively early in the morning and we'd been flying all morning. And we were coming back through out of the terminal. And the Orlando International Airport is massive.
Yeah.
So we were coming through the area and I just sort of started noticing out of the corner of my eye an awful lot of police hanging around in the airport. And not just like regular police, but, guys with like flak vests and, automatic weapons and things like that. And it just seemed odd. And I actually remember my friend Denny and myself were walking past the entrance to the international wing, and noticing that they had Jersey barriers put up blocking it off. And we were talking about wondering, they must be doing construction or something like that. We really weren't paying that close of attention to what was actually going on around us.
Yeah.
But we were down in the baggage terminal waiting for his dad to pick us up. And his father is one of these guys who's just notoriously late for everything. And it gets on my buddy Denny's nerves pretty easily. So he was getting kind of heated and upset and really starting to fume. And I figured, with nothing going on, I figured I'd call home and check in. So I was married at the time. So I called my wife. She was at work. And it's funny. I got one of her coworkers on the phone. Just called in and I said, "Yeah, it's Pat." And the girl, I forget who the girl was, but on the other line, she's like, "Patrick." It's like, "Oh my God." It's like, "Hang on a second." And she I could hear the phone literally drop on the table, And my wife gets on the phone, and I just decided I have no idea what's going on. So I just decided to be a bozo, and I'm just like, "Yeah, we weren't really paying too close attention as to what was going on. We wound up in I'm not sure how, but we wound up in I think it's like Omaha or something. Or I don't remember some town that started with an O. I just just being a doofus.
Yep.
And she believed me. And she's like, "Well, you guys they're going to put you guys up they're going to give you a hotel or something. They're not going to make you stay in the airport or anything, are you?" And I was just like, and she was very tense. And I was just like, "Well, I'm just kidding. We're in Orlando. We're fine. Everything's fine. We're just, waiting for Denny's dad to pick us up."
Yep.
And there was like a brief second pause. And she basically said, "You're an a-hole." That's not what she's not exactly what she said.
Yeah. No.
But I was just like, and she got mad, and I'm like, "Well, what? I'm just kidding around, lighten up, just relax." And there was another brief second pause, and she just kind of said, "Do you even know what's going on?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she basically said, "We're at war." That's exactly what she said. "We're at war. They've bombed the Twin Towers. Both the towers are down," is what she said. Which didn't really register in my head exactly what that meant at the time.
Yeah.
And she's just kind of explaining to me what happened. And at that point, I don't really remember what she told me because as soon as she told me that, I'm looking up at the schedule board,
Yeah.
where they have all the flight times and everything,
Yeah.
arrival times and whatnot. And as she's telling me this, I'm seeing it, and it just says, all of a sudden, everything just starts switching from top to bottom, just like, canceled, 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 canceled. And it suddenly dawned on me that the entire airport's being locked down around me.
Yeah.
Like, while she's on the phone. And I just had this like, chill go through me.
Mm-hmm.
That it was, I can remember exactly how it felt, but it's still kind of hard to describe.
Yeah.
It was very much of a... I think it was very much of a, like, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto, kind of feeling. Like,
Yeah.
I had the distinct impression that I had just stepped into, or, walked through into a completely different world.
Yeah.
Without really wanting to. And it was one of those things where I've stepped through the doorway, but as soon as I step through, the doorway disappears behind me and there's no going back.
Mm-hmm.
I had that sense that, we're in the middle of a turning point in history, kind of thing. Not to be too melodramatic, but at the moment, that's what it really felt like. It was just,
Yeah.
And it didn't really click in my head for a while. And I kind of almost didn't believe it until I got off the phone with her and I go walking back over to Denny to tell him what my ex had just told me. And his dad walked in at the same time, and we got to Denny at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And Denny was just about ready to lose his temper on his dad, and just, where the hell have you been, whatever. And Denny and George, his dad's name was George, was just like, you don't understand. I had to park like almost a quarter mile away. The whole place is locked down. And he's like, what? He's like, and he didn't believe him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no. You got to listen to what he says. This is bad. And he kind of explained the whole thing, and we didn't really, it didn't really dawn on. I mean, that kind of thing takes a while to sink in.
Yeah.
So, but that's when we first found out.
Did what did the next few days kind of, or the next week, or the next, how long was it until sort of your schedule returned back to the, can't really say the norm.
The routine didn't come back for at least a couple weeks. I ended up getting stranded down there because they grounded all the flights. We were flying. We flew out of Providence at like 7:30 in the morning ish, and we were actually flying over New York City. And I remember the pilot actually telling us, because you're on a flying, the pilot will cue in every now and then, say, hey, if you look out this window, look over the wing there, you'll see this and such and whatnot.
Yep.
And they did it over Manhattan. They said, and I remember him saying, if you look out the window, you can see Central Park, and if you look to your right, you can see the World Trade Center. It actually said World Trade Center and Statue of Liberty. And but then shortly after that, he didn't come on again until we landed.
Mm-hmm.
And flying from New England to Florida takes about 3.5 hours or so. And we got down there in just a little over 2, which I thought was really, in hindsight, I remember thinking was kind of strange, but I didn't really make much of it. I hate flying, so I was just glad to be down, on the ground that much sooner.
Yeah.
But I was supposed to fly back that Thursday. I was only supposed to be down there for 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and that was it. I didn't end up getting home until the following Monday. I basically got stranded. I got stranded at their house. So I work in finance, and the stock market was closed for a week.
Yep.
So none of the places I was going to interview at were even open, so that was out. And obviously I didn't take a look at any houses because the real estate, nothing, everything, the entire country was basically shut down.
Yeah.
So I basically, and his wife was a nurse, and they had just moved down there. She was poor lady was 7.5 months pregnant. Just moved down there, didn't know a soul. And actually, now that I think of it, nobody really knew anything, and that's why she was so, my ex was so surprised to hear from me, is because they didn't know where the planes came from. And people that knew us knew we were flying and where we were flying to, and they didn't know if that was, one of those planes was our plane.
Yeah.
So it was, he got home, he ended up calling into her, and in Lakeland Regional Hospital, where she works, it's like UMass, it's huge. Uh-huh. And he ended up he called into just the 800 number to say, you know, connect me with Brenda Davis, and they knew immediately who he was looking for, and they were even said, it's like, is this her husband? And he's like, yeah, and they basically, you know, put out like an all points bulletin throughout the hospital to get a hold of her because everybody was wondering what had happened. You know, they didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we were for like a couple hours we were missing persons. You know, amongst the many thousands who were.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, for the people who knew us, not really, but you know, it's just that communication gap. Which so he wasn't working at the time. He was getting his MBA. So he and I ended up basically, we ended up spending the week, you know, while she worked full time. He and I ended up spending the week sitting around his pool drinking beer for 7 days with nothing to do. You know, it was actually kind of fun, which is kind of bizarre to say.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. How did you end up? How long did it take, and how did you end up getting back home?
Excuse me. I ended up having to take the train. I was supposed to fly out on Thursday, but you know they didn't put the planes back in the air. I think until I don't even remember when. I think that not until the weekend. But there was such a backlog of canceled and delayed flights that you know it became next to impossible to get a seat on a plane.
Yeah.
So I didn't even really try. And plus, you know, by the time I finally was getting together to go home, there was, you know, a tropical storm rolling through Central Florida, and I wouldn't get on a plane. I don't like getting on a plane in good weather. You know, before 9/11, there's no way in hell I'm getting on a plane in the middle of a hurricane, and you know, I wasn't doing it.
Yeah.
So I ended up taking the Amtrak back out of Lakeland, which is in Central Florida. It's like halfway between Orlando and Tampa. Out of there, took me about 3 days to get back. Now that I think about it, 2 nights. Basically, I spent 2 nights on the train. So I went from Lakeland all the way up to New York City, to Manhattan, 6 days after 9/11, and then from there back into Worcester to get home. So.
Were there what was it like being in Manhattan that soon after 9/11?
Very, very a little surreal.
Yeah.
I'd been to Manhattan once before, years earlier, and I always remembered how, you know, how almost how angry the city was, how fast it was, how loud it was, how everybody was just go, 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 and, you know, nobody stopped for anybody or anything. And this time, everything was still moving. All the pieces were still moving. Nothing, you know, on the immediate surface, you know, if you just woke up out of a coma, you wouldn't have thought anything was initially different, except it was quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Like all the cabs were still running, but you know, usually in New York, Manhattan cabbies, they'll sit on their horns, you know, and just everywhere. But none of them were doing that. People, you know, it sounds like a cliche to say it, but the best way I can describe it is that, you know, people in Manhattan were actually nice to each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a cheap way of saying it, but I mean, it's the only kind of succinct way I can think of putting it. There wasn't any of that kind of New York, you know, angst, tension that you get from being an outsider going down there.
Yeah.
And all I can remember is just there were thousands and thousands of missing person poster taped up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
You know, on every wall, every fence, every light pole, everything. And I don't honestly think that I saw the same poster twice. There were thousands of them all over Manhattan.
Yeah.
And there was just this pall over the city. You know, it was almost like, you know, all I can think of it is like it had that same kind of tension that you see in those like World War II documentaries about like Berlin after the war or London during the Blitz, when everybody's just sort of very much waiting for the other shoe to drop almost.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny actually. I remember when there's a stretch when I was on the train coming into Manhattan. There's a stretch of it that runs right along. When you're in Jersey, it runs right along the Hudson River.
Yep.
And you can see the southern tip of Manhattan, like right there. And all I can remember is that you could see the island, and you could see the skyline. But then there was this huge, like very obvious gap where the towers used to be, and it was just all of this thick thick, dark gray smoke that just billowing out of it like a chimney. And it was just, I mean, it had to have gone like a half a mile up into the sky because it was just dwarfing everything. And it was just going straight out to sea all the way out to the horizon. I mean, it was just...
And how many days after
This
the
is
attack
like
was
this is
this?
like a week. This is like Monday, the following Monday. So basically, almost a full week afterwards, it was still burning like crazy, and you know, so that kind of set the tone for even just coming into the city.
Yeah.
And it was a strange day. I ended up sharing a cab with another lady off the train who was actually from Manhattan, and I didn't know her. You know, we kind of small talked about stuff. You know, where you're from, where you come, you know, what were you doing out of, you know, coming from, just, you know, chit chat.
Yeah.
But nothing, no talk about New York or anything like that. It was almost like she didn't want to talk about it. You know.
Yeah.
And I didn't either, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
You know, and it was just, but we ended up sharing a cab into the city to wherever it was she was going to, and I had to spend the day there because my next train wasn't in the evening,
Mm-hmm.
and we ended up dropping me off, and I was like, you know, I want to go see the Museum of Modern Art because I'd always wanted to see it, and finally had a chance to. So I ended up walking, but you know, you walk in Boston, you go up a couple of blocks. It's, you know, it's not much, a couple of blocks.
Yeah.
Well, a block in Manhattan is like a quarter of a mile. You know, it's, at least it felt like it. So it took me forever to walk up there, and I finally got up there, and they were renovating the place. The only part of the museum open was the lobby. I didn't get to see anything. So I turned around and I walked back, and I actually tried, you stand right on Fifth Avenue, and it's a straight line down into the financial district.
Yep.
And so you could see all the way down, and it's just this like canyon of buildings. And you could see at the very end of it, on the horizon, you could see where all the smoke was coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and you know, it's funny. It's like you almost lose your depth perception because of it. So you don't really have any idea how far away it is. So I was going to walk down. I wanted to walk down and actually see it.
Yeah.
I didn't want to, but I kind of felt like compelled to.
Yeah, obligated.
Yeah. After about an hour of walking, when I hadn't even gotten a quarter of the way, because you don't realize how big that island is until you try to walk it, I realized I was going to miss my train if I didn't turn around and go back. So I had to turn around. I turned around on my back, and I was just like, I didn't get anywhere near it. It's you know, it's very much like the little country mouse in the big city. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a. So I ended up spending the rest of the afternoon in Penn Station. That was an adventure in and of itself. So.